Sterling Enterprises stock plummeted 40% in a single morning, but the real crash happened 3 years prior, inside a Manhattan penthouse. It wasn't a market correction. It was a moral bankruptcy. When Alistair Sterling looked at his wife, 6 months pregnant with twins, and handed her divorce papers instead of a jagged breath of apology, he didn't just break a vow, he ignited a war. He chose the glitter of a supermodel over the substance of a partner. But he forgot one crucial rule of business and life. Never underestimate the competition, especially when that competition is Nathaniel Blackwood, the one man waiting to catch what you were foolish enough to throw away. This isn't just a breakup. It's a hostile takeover of the heart. The chandelier in the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel didn't just sparkle. It seemed to sneer, casting fractured prisms of light onto the diamond necklace choking Serafina Sterling's neck. It was their 5th anniversary, the wood anniversary, traditionally. But in the Sterling world, everything was cold, hard glass. Serafina adjusted the silk of her emerald gown, her hand trembling slightly as it brushed against the barely there bump of her stomach. She hadn't told him yet. Tonight was the night. She had the sonogram pictures tucked inside a velvet envelope in her clutch, resting against a tube of lipstick she couldn't afford to smudge. "Stop fidgeting, Sarah." Alistair's voice was a low hiss, barely audible over the clinking of crystal and the hum of the string quartet playing Vivaldi. "The shareholders are watching. You look nervous. Nervous looks guilty." Alistair Sterling stood tall, a monument to ruthless efficiency. At 34, he was the youngest CEO in the Fortune 500, a man whose jawline was as sharp as his business acumen. He wore a bespoke Brioni suit that cost more than Serafina's childhood home. "I'm not nervous, Alistair," she whispered, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I have a surprise for you later. A good one." Alistair didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed across the room, tracking a figure in a dress made of red sequins and bad intentions. "I have a surprise for you too, Serafina, but let's get the speeches over with." The air in the room felt thin, recycled. Serafina watched as Alistair took the stage. The applause was polite, terrified reverence. He spoke of growth, of Q3 earnings, of the future of Sterling Tech. And then he paused. "Growth," Alistair said, his voice amplified, booming through the hall. "Growth requires shedding dead weight. It requires the courage to pivot when an asset no longer yields a return." A few people chuckled, thinking it was a corporate metaphor. Serafina felt a cold dread pool in her stomach. Alistair's eyes finally found hers in the crowd. They were empty. "Serafina," he said, and the room went deadly silent. "We've had 5 years, but the direction of this company, and my life, is shifting. As of this morning, my legal team has filed for the dissolution of our marriage." The silence wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum. Serafina felt the blood drain from her face. She stood frozen, the velvet envelope in her clutch burning against her palm. "I have found a partner," Alistair continued, gesturing to the back of the room, "who embodies the future of the Sterling brand. Dynamic, global, beautiful." The woman in the red dress stepped forward. Bianca Voretti, the face of Vogue Italia, the woman who had been consulting on the Sterling marketing campaign for months. She walked up the stairs to the stage, her hips swaying like a pendulum, counting down Serafina's demise. She took Alistair's hand, and he kissed her knuckles. "This is the new era," Alistair announced. Serafina didn't scream. She didn't faint. She simply stood there, the humiliation washing over her like ice water. The camera flashes started popping, blinding white explosions capturing her destruction. She turned, her legs feeling like lead, and walked toward the exit. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, not out of respect, but out of fear of catching the contagion of failure. In the lobby, Alistair caught up to her, breathless not from emotion, but from the rush of his performance. "The prenup is ironclad, Sarah," he said, checking his Patek Philippe watch. "You get the flat in Chelsea and a stipend for 2 years. Don't make this messy." Serafina looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. She reached into her clutch and pulled out the velvet envelope. "I was going to give you this," she said, her voice shaking. Alistair took it, frowned, and opened it. He stared at the sonogram. 2 distinct heartbeats. He looked up, his expression unreadable for a second, before it hardened into something cruel. Convenient timing. But it changes nothing. My lawyers will arrange a paternity test. Until then, you're on your own. Bianca doesn't like children, and quite frankly, neither do I. If they are mine, I'll pay the support, but don't expect me to play father." He dropped the photo on the marble floor and walked back to the applause. 3 months later, the Chelsea flat was gone. The ironclad prenup had a morality clause that Alistair's lawyers had twisted. They claimed Serafina had been emotionally unstable and damaging to the company reputation during the divorce proceedings, effectively freezing her assets. She was living in a cramped studio in Queens, waiting tables at a diner that smelled of grease and despair. Her belly was undeniable now. Twin boys. She called them Leo and Luna in her head, even though she knew they were both boys. She just needed softness in her life. It was a rainy Tuesday when the humiliation reached its peak. Serafina was on her knees, scrubbing a coffee stain off the floor of the diner, when a pair of polished Oxford shoes stopped inches from her face. "Is this the level of service one expects here?" a familiar, mocking voice asked. She looked up. It was Bianca Veretti, draped in a white fur coat that shouldn't have been anywhere near Queens. Alistair was behind her, looking bored, tapping away on his phone. "We took a wrong turn heading to the airport," Bianca laughed, looking down at Serafina. "Oh my God, Alistair, look, it's the ex." Alistair glanced down. He saw his ex-wife, heavily pregnant with his children, wearing a stained apron. He didn't blink. "Let's go, Bianca. The smell in here is atrocious." "Wait," Bianca smirked. She pulled a $100 bill from her purse and crumpled it, dropping it onto the wet floor next to Serafina's hand. "For the baby. Buy some diapers. Or some dignity." They turned to leave, the bell on the door jingling cheerfully. Serafina stared at the bill. Tears blurred her vision, hot and stinging. She reached for the money. She needed it. God help her, she needed it. But a large, tanned hand intercepted her own. "Don't!" a deep voice rumbled. Serafina flinched, looking up. Standing there was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and thunder. He was tall, broader than Alistair, with dark hair greying at the temples and eyes the colour of a stormy sea. He wore a charcoal suit, no tie, the top button of his shirt undone. Nathaniel Blackwood, the owner of Blackwood Heavy Industries. Sterling's only real rival, the man Alistair hated more than anyone on earth. Nathaniel picked up the $100 bill, smoothed it out, walked to the counter, and dropped it in the tip jar. Then he walked back to Serafina and extended a hand. "Get up, Serafina," he said. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation. I can't," she stammered, struggling to find her footing with the weight of the pregnancy. "I'm working." "Not anymore," Nathaniel said. He signaled to the diner manager, a greasy man named Carl. How much to buy out her shift? Actually, how much to buy out her contract? "She ain't got a contract, mister. She's at will," Carl grunted. "Then she resigns," Nathaniel said. He looked back at Serafina. You studied art history at Yale, didn't you? Top of your class. You curated the Masterworks exhibit at the Met before Alistair made you play trophy wife. Serafina blinked, stunned. How do you know that? I do my research, and I hate wasted potential. Nathaniel's eyes dropped to her stomach, and for a fleeting second, the hardness in his face softened. And I hate bullies. Alistair Sterling is a bully. Why do you care? She asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Because, Nathaniel said, his voice dropping an octave, I need a wife, and you, Serafina, need a war chest. The penthouse of the Blackwood building was different from the Sterling mansion, where Alistair's home was all chrome and white leather, sterile like a hospital. Nathaniel's home was rich with mahogany, leather-bound books, and warm amber lighting. It smelled of tobacco and cedar. Serafina sat on a plush velvet sofa, her hands resting protectively over her twins. Nathaniel poured 2 glasses of sparkling water. No alcohol for her, he'd insisted immediately, and sat opposite her. Here is the situation, Nathaniel began, sliding a thick document across the coffee table. My board of directors is old-fashioned. They believe a family man is a stable man. They are threatening to block my acquisition of a European logistics firm because they think I'm too rogue. And you want me to play the part? Serafina asked, skepticism lining her voice. I don't want you to play a part. I want you to be my partner, Nathaniel corrected. We marry. It's legal, binding. You get full access to my resources. Top-tier medical care for the delivery. A trust fund for the children that Alistair can never touch. A seat on the board of my charitable foundation so you can resume your work in the art world. And what do you get? I get the image I need. And, Nathaniel leaned forward, I get the satisfaction of seeing the look on Alistair's face when he realizes he threw away a queen. He doesn't want me, Nathaniel. He made that clear. He doesn't want the woman he diminished, Nathaniel said firmly. He doesn't know the woman you're about to become. Serafina looked at the papers. And the babies? They aren't yours. Biology is the least interesting part of fatherhood, Nathaniel said. I can't have children, Serafina. A medical issue from my time in the military. These boys, if you let me, I will raise them as Blackwoods. They will carry my name, if you wish. They will be heirs to an empire that dwarfs Sterling Tech. Serafina felt a crack in the wall she had built around her heart. Why? Because, Nathaniel stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city lights. I saw you at that gala 3 years ago. Before the announcement, you fixed Alistair's tie. You spoke to the waiters with kindness. You have grace, Serafina. Real grace. Alistair thought you were weak because you were kind. He was wrong. She signed the papers. The wedding was small, private, held in a chapel in the Hamptons. No press, no fanfare, just a promise. 2 months later, the twins came. It was a difficult birth. Serafina was weak from months of stress and poor nutrition. The monitors beeped frantically in the delivery room of Mount Sinai. Nathaniel was there. He wasn't the father, but he held her hand so tight his knuckles turned white. Stay with me, Sarah, he commanded, his voice cracking. You don't get to leave now. When the cries of the first baby filled the room, Nathaniel Blackwood, the Iron Wolf of Wall Street, wept. He held the 2 boys, tiny, fragile things, against his massive chest. Leo, he whispered to the first. And Orion. He looked at Serafina, who was groggy but smiling. You wanted Luna, but he's a boy. Orion. The hunter. Leo and Orion, Serafina whispered. My stars. Our stars, Nathaniel corrected softly. While Serafina recovered, Nathaniel went to work. He didn't just sign the birth certificates. He legally adopted them before the ink was dry. He hired the best nannies, not to raise them, but to help Serafina so she could sleep. He moved his office to the home library so he could hear them cry. Meanwhile, across the city, Alistair Sterling was discovering that life with Bianca Voretti was expensive. The consulting fees were astronomical. She threw tantrums if the jet wasn't ready, and the public loved the idea of them, but the shareholders were noticing Alistair was distracted. But the real blow came 6 months later. The Metropolitan Museum of Art Gala, the biggest night of the year. Alistair arrived with Bianca. She wore a dress that showed too much skin, desperate for attention. Alistair looked tired. His stock was down 8% that quarter. Then the murmurs started. A hush swept over the red carpet. A sleek vintage Rolls-Royce pulled up. The door opened. Nathaniel Blackwood stepped out, looking regal in a tuxedo. He reached a hand inside. Serafina emerged. She was breathtaking. She wore a gown of midnight blue velvet that hugged her post-pregnancy curves in a way that screamed power, not vulnerability. Diamonds, Blackwood family heirlooms, glittered at her throat. She looked healthier, stronger, and more beautiful than she ever had with Alistair. She took Nathaniel's arm, and he looked at her with a heat that made the cameras go wild. Alistair froze on the stairs. Bianca tugged at his arm. "Ali, come on, they're taking pictures of her." "That's—" Alistair's voice trailed off. Serafina locked eyes with Alistair. She didn't look down. She didn't tremble. She smiled, a cool, detached smile reserved for strangers. "Hello, Alistair," she said as they passed him on the stairs. "I believe you know my husband." Nathaniel paused, leaning in close to Alistair. "Great party, Sterling. By the way, the twins started crawling today. Leo has your chin. Shame he'll never have your name." They walked past, ascending the stairs into the light, leaving Alistair Sterling in the shadows of his own making. The collapse of an empire rarely happens with a single explosion. It happens with a series of ignored structural fractures. For Sterling Enterprises, the fracture was Bianca Voretti. 2 years had passed since the Met Gala. The twins, Leo and Orion, were now energetic toddlers with mop-tops of curly dark hair and an insatiable curiosity. They called Nathaniel Papa. They didn't know who Alistair was, and Alistair had never asked, until the quarterly earnings call. Alistair sat at the head of the long obsidian conference table in the Sterling Tower. The mood was funeral. "We missed projections by 12%, Alistair," the CFO, a weary man named Gerald, said, sliding a report across the table. "The Asian markets are cold on us. They don't trust the leadership stability. And expenses are up. Way up." Alistair rubbed his temples. "It's the rebranding. Bianca said we needed to modernize the aesthetic. The rebranding cost us $15 million, Gerald snapped, losing his patience. "And the consulting fees for Ms. Voretti's agency are bleeding us dry. Alistair, the board is talking about a vote of no confidence." "Let them talk," Alistair snarled, standing up. "I am Sterling Enterprises. Without me, this stock is worthless." He stormed out of the office, needing an escape. He went to the penthouse he shared with Bianca. He expected comfort. He found chaos. Clothes were strewn everywhere. Bianca was on the phone, screaming in rapid-fire Italian. When she saw Alistair, she didn't hang up. She pointed to a magazine on the coffee table. "Have you seen this?" she shrieked, finally tossing the phone onto the sofa. Alistair looked down. It was Forbes. The cover featured Serafina. She was wearing a white hard hat, holding a blueprint, standing next to Nathaniel at a shipyard. The headline read, "The New Power Couple. How Serafina Blackwood Revitalized the Maritime Industry." Alistair felt bile rise in his throat. She's an art historian. What does she know about ships? Apparently more than you know about keeping your wife happy, Bianca yelled. My credit card was declined at Bergdorf's today, Alistair. Declined. Do you know how embarrassing that is? We have cash flow issues, Bianca. You spent $40,000 on handbags last month. I am a supermodel. I have an image to maintain. If I look poor, I am poor. She threw a vase, a Ming replica, at the wall. It shattered. Fix it, Alistair, or I walk. Alistair stared at the shattered porcelain. He realized, with a sinking dread, that he didn't care if she walked. He looked back at the magazine cover. Serafina looked radiant, strong. He remembered the way she used to rub his shoulders after a long day. He remembered how she saved money in the early days of his company, clipping coupons so he could buy better servers. He had traded a partner for a parasite. A dark, twisted thought took root in his mind. Nathaniel Blackwood had taken everything from him. His wife, his dignity, his market share. But Nathaniel had a weakness. He had legally adopted the twins, yes, but the biological connection, the blood, that belonged to Alistair. Alistair picked up his phone and dialed his lawyer, a shark named Marcus Thorne. Thorne, Alistair said, his voice cold. I want to file a motion. Regarding the merger? No, Alistair said, watching Bianca scream at her assistant in the other room. Regarding my sons, I want custody. The subpoena arrived on a Sunday morning. Serafina was in the garden of their Hamptons estate, watching Nathaniel teach the boys how to plant hydrangeas. Nathaniel didn't mind the dirt. He was on his knees, laughing as Leo tried to eat a handful of soil. No, Leo, that's for the worms, Nathaniel chuckled, gently wiping the dirt from the boy's face with his thumb. The gate buzzer rang. A process server walked up the driveway. The security detail stepped forward, but Serafina waved them off. She took the envelope. She opened it, and the color drained from her face. What is it? Nathaniel asked, dusting off his hands and walking over. He saw her expression and immediately went into protective mode, his body tense. It's Alistair, she whispered. He's suing for full custody. Nathaniel snatched the papers. His eyes scanned the legal jargon. Alienation of affection, denial of biological rights, unfit environment due to husband's dangerous business connections. Dangerous business connections? Nathaniel scoffed. I run a logistics company, not a cartel. The man is delusional. He has money, Nathaniel, and he has the press. I have more money, Nathaniel said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. And I have the truth. The media storm began 24 hours later. Alistair went on a morning talk show. He wore a soft blue sweater, looking humble, contrite, and teary-eyed. I made mistakes in my marriage, Alistair told the host, wiping a fake tear. I admit that. But Serafina, she took my children to hurt me. She moved in with my business rival out of spite. I haven't seen my boys in 2 years. I just want to be a father. Every man deserves a chance to be a father. The public, fickle as ever, began to sway. Fathers' rights began trending. People forgot about the affair, the pregnant abandonment. They only saw a crying man who missed his sons. The court date was set for a month later. Inside the Blackwood residence, the atmosphere was tense. Nathaniel's legal team, the best in the country, was gathered in the library. He's playing dirty, the lead attorney, a woman named Rebecca, said. He's demanding a paternity test to establish biological irrefutability. Then he's going to argue that your adoption was fraudulent because Serafina coerced you into it to hide the children from him. Coerced me? Nathaniel laughed, a dry, humorless sound. I begged her to let me protect them. It doesn't matter what's true, Rebecca said. It matters what looks true. We need to kill this in the deposition. The day of the deposition arrived. Alistair walked into the conference room flanked by 3 lawyers. He looked smug. He winked at Serafina. Nathaniel sat stone-faced. "Mr. Sterling," Rebecca began, "you claim you want custody. Can you tell me the date of the twins' birth?" Alistair paused. He adjusted his cufflinks. "It was in May. Mid-May." "Wrong. June 2nd, Rebecca said. "Can you tell me their middle names?" I wasn't consulted on their names. You were sent a birth announcement via certified mail. You returned it unopened." Rebecca slid a returned envelope across the table. "Can you tell me if they have any allergies?" "This is trivia," Alistair snapped. "I am their father." "Biologically, perhaps," Nathaniel spoke for the first time. His voice vibrated through the table. "But let's talk about biology, Alistair. Let's talk about the stress levels in Serafina's blood when you served her divorce papers while she was carrying them. Let's talk about the malnutrition she suffered because you cut off her access to funds." "I did no such thing," Nathaniel signaled to Rebecca. She played a recording. It was a voicemail Alistair had left his lawyer 3 years ago. Voice of Alistair. "Cut her off, Thorne. Freeze the joint accounts. If she wants to eat, she can beg. Maybe the stress will solve the pregnancy problem for me." The room went silent. Even Alistair's lawyers looked uncomfortable. "You wanted them dead?" Nathaniel said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You hoped she would miscarry. And now that they are healthy, now that they are heirs to the Blackwood Trust, suddenly you want to be Dad?" Alistair stood up, slamming his hands on the table. "That recording is inadmissible. It's privileged." "Actually," Rebecca smiled, "you left that voicemail on the company phone that belongs to Sterling Enterprises, which, as of this morning, has a new majority shareholder." Alistair froze. "What?" "I didn't just buy your debt, Alistair," Nathaniel said, leaning back in his chair. "I bought your board. They voted to sell the controlling stake to Blackwood Industries at 9 a.m. today. I own the phone. I own the recording. And I own you." Alistair sank back into his chair, his face pale grey. "We will drop the custody suit," Alistair's lawyer whispered frantically to him. "Right now, we drop it." "No," Nathaniel said. "You won't just drop it. You will sign a termination of parental rights, permanent, irrevocable. Or I release that audio tape to the press, and you will never sit on a board of directors again. You will be a pariah." Alistair looked at Serafina. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at a photo of the boys on her phone, smiling softly. She didn't even care enough to hate him anymore. That realization hurt more than the bankruptcy. He signed the papers. Alistair Sterling returned to his penthouse a broken man. He was no longer CEO. He was a figurehead with a golden parachute that Nathaniel Blackwood had dictated. He had money, but no power. And for a man like Alistair, that was death. He opened the door, expecting Bianca to be waiting with a complaint. Instead, the apartment was quiet. Too quiet. The closets were open, empty. The jewelry box on the vanity was swept clean. On the dining table there was a note, pinned down by her engagement ring, a 5-carat diamond he had bought to shut her up after the scandal. "Alistair, I don't do former CEOs. I have a meeting with a producer in LA. He thinks I have potential as an actress. Don't come looking for me. By the way, I sold the story of our affair to the tabloids. Exclusive rights. They paid more than you've given me in 6 months. Ciao B." Alistair stared at the note. He laughed, a manic, hollow sound that echoed off the marble walls. He poured himself a scotch, drank it, and poured another. He turned on the TV. The news was already running the story. But it wasn't just Bianca's interview. It was worse. "Breaking news. The fall of Sterling. Insider trading investigation launched." The screen showed Bianca, looking glamorous and tearful, talking to a reporter. "He made me do it," Bianca was saying on screen, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "He told me to leak false information about the Blackwood merger to drive down their stock price so he could buy it cheap. I didn't know it was illegal. I was just a girl in love." It was a lie, a complete fabrication. Bianca had been the one to suggest corporate espionage, but she had played the victim card perfectly. She had immunity. Alistair did not. Alistair's phone started ringing. It was the SEC, then the DOJ. He sat on his white leather sofa, the one Serafina had hated because it was too cold, and watched his life disintegrate in high definition. Meanwhile, across the city, the Blackwood home was warm and filled with the smell of roasting chicken. Serafina was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables. Nathaniel walked in, his suit jacket off, his tie loosened. He walked up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "It's done," he murmured into her hair. He signed the termination rights. He can never contest the adoption again. Serafina put down the knife and turned in his arms. She buried her face in his chest, letting out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 3 years. "Is it really over?" "The threat is over," Nathaniel said. "But the news. Have you seen it? About Bianca?" Serafina nodded. "I saw. Do you think she's telling the truth?" "I think snakes bite whoever is closest," Nathaniel said. "Alistair created a culture of betrayal. He's just finally experiencing it from the receiving end." "I almost feel sorry for him," Serafina admitted. "Almost." "Don't," Nathaniel said, lifting her chin to look her in the eyes. "He made his choices. Now we make ours." "And what are our choices?" "Well," Nathaniel smiled, a boyish glint in his eye. "I was thinking, the boys are asking for a puppy, and I was thinking, maybe the house is big enough for one more." Serafina's eyes widened. "A dog?" "No." Nathaniel's hand moved to her stomach, resting there gently. "I mean, we have the doctor's clearance now. We could try. For a sister or a brother?" Serafina smiled, tears pricking her eyes. "You want more children?" "I want a family, Sarah, with you. A big, loud, chaotic family that fills every empty room in this house." The moment was perfect. But outside the walls of their sanctuary, the final act of Alistair's desperation was being written. He wasn't going to go to prison quietly. If he was going down, he was going to try to take Nathaniel Blackwood with him. Alistair, drunk and unhinged, stumbled out of his penthouse. He got into his sports car. He didn't have a destination, but he had a target. He knew where the Blackwoods lived. He knew they were happy, and that happiness was a mockery of his existence. He revved the engine. The rain was starting to fall, slicking the streets of Manhattan. The storm over the Hudson Valley wasn't just weather. It was a biblical purging. Rain lashed against the windshield of the Aston Martin DB11 with the force of gravel, blurring the world into streaks of charcoal and violent silver. Inside the cockpit of the car, the leather smelled of expensive desperation and stale scotch. Alistair Sterling gripped the steering wheel until the blood drained from his knuckles. The digital speedometer projected onto the windshield flickered. 95% os nemsmiliaos sepspa. 100 He was hydroplaning on a road designed for Sunday drives, not suicide runs. But physics had ceased to matter to him hours ago. Earlier that evening, the final domino had fallen. His lawyer, Marcus Thorne, had called him not as a counsel, but as an executioner. The DOJ was moving forward with the indictment for insider trading, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Bianca's testimony had been the nail, but the hammer was the forensic accounting trail Nathaniel Blackwood had quietly handed over to the feds. Alistair wasn't just looking at fines. He was looking at 15 years in federal prison. "I built it," Alistair screamed, his voice cracking in the solitude of the speeding car. "I built the world they're living in." He reached for the bottle of Macallan 25, wedged in the cup holder, taking a swig that burned his throat. The alcohol did nothing to numb the image searing his mind. The magazine cover from last week. Time magazine. It featured Nathaniel and Serafina, standing on the balcony of the New York Stock Exchange, ringing the bell. The headline was simple, cruel, and absolute. The new dynasty. They had erased him. They hadn't just defeated him. They had overwritten his legacy as if he were a corrupted file. Alistair didn't have a plan. He had a location. He knew the coordinates of the Blackwood estate in Bedford. He had looked it up 1,000 times on Google Earth, zooming in on the pool, the gardens, the swing set where his biological sons played. He wasn't going there to apologize. He wasn't even sure if he was going there to kill them. He was going there to shatter them. He wanted to drive this $200,000 piece of machinery through their front door and force them to look at the wreckage of the man they had destroyed. He wanted fear. He needed their fear to validate his existence. The GPS chimed. Destination ahead on the right. Alistair saw the stone pillars of the entrance looming in the headlights. The iron gates were closed, topped with the Blackwood family crest, a wolf holding a spear. "Open the gate!" Alistair roared, flooring the accelerator. The engine howled, a mechanical scream that matched his own. He didn't brake. Inside the library of the Blackwood Manor, the storm outside felt miles away. The room was a sanctuary of mahogany, firelight, and the scent of old paper and beeswax. Nathaniel Blackwood sat in a high-backed leather wing chair, a book of Greek mythology open on his lap. Leo and Orion, now 4 years old, were sprawled on the Persian rug, building a fortress out of wooden blocks. They were wearing matching flannel pajamas, safe and warm. Serafina sat on the sofa across from them, her legs tucked under her. She was reviewing the blueprints for the new pediatric wing of the hospital her foundation was funding. She looked up, watching the firelight dance on Nathaniel's face. The harsh lines that had defined him when they first met, the Iron Wolf persona, had softened around the edges, smoothed by the erosion of love. "Papa," Orion asked, holding up a block, "is the Minotaur bad?" Nathaniel looked down, his eyes crinkling at the corners. The Minotaur was a monster, yes, but he was also trapped in a maze he didn't build. Sometimes monsters are just sad, angry things that don't know how to ask for help. "I'd fight him," Leo declared, brandishing a plastic sword. "I'd protect Mama." Nathaniel's expression turned serious, filled with a fierce pride. "I know you would, Leo. But the best way to fight a monster is to make sure you never become one." Serafina smiled, a profound sense of peace settling in her chest. It was a peace she had fought for, bled for. She looked at the clock. It was almost 9 p.m. "All right, warriors," she said softly. "The fortress has to close for the night. Bedtime." A collective groan rose from the floor. 5 more minutes. "Negotiations are closed," Nathaniel teased, preparing to stand up. That was when the world ended. It wasn't a sound. It was a concussion. A horrific, metal-shrieking crunch that vibrated through the floorboards and rattled the crystal decanters on the sidebar. The heavy oak front doors, located down the hall, shuddered in their frames. Serafina dropped her blueprints, her hand flying to her mouth. The boys froze, their eyes wide with terror. Nathaniel was on his feet instantly. The father vanished. The soldier appeared. His posture shifted. His center of gravity dropped. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice low and devoid of panic. "Serafina, take them behind the desk. Lock the library door. Do not open it unless you hear my voice." "Nathaniel, no," she whispered, standing up, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Call the police." "I will, but I have to see what that was." He grabbed a heavy iron poker from the fireplace, a primitive weapon, but effective, and moved into the hallway. He pulled his phone from his pocket, dialing 911 as he walked toward the foyer. The scene that awaited him was nightmare fuel. The massive wrought iron gates at the end of the driveway hadn't just been hit, they had been obliterated. But the car hadn't made it to the house. The Aston Martin had careened off the stone pillar, spun 360 degrees, and slammed sideways into an ancient oak tree halfway up the drive. The car was a crumpled ball of foil. The horn was stuck, blaring a continuous dying note that cut through the sound of the rain. Steam hissed from the shattered radiator, mixing with the smoke beginning to curl from the undercarriage. Nathaniel didn't hesitate. He dropped the poker and sprinted into the storm. The freezing rain soaked him to the bone in seconds, but he didn't feel it. He ran toward the wreck, his boots sliding on the wet gravel. As he got closer, he smelled it. Gasoline, raw, pungent, and dangerous. "Hey!" Nathaniel shouted, reaching in the car. "Can you hear me?" He peered through the shattered driver's side window. The airbag had deployed, but it was deflating. The driver was slumped forward, blood masking half his face. But even through the ruin, even through the blood and the years, Nathaniel recognized the cut of the suit. He recognized the Patek Philippe watch on the limp wrist. "Alistair," Nathaniel breathed, the name tasting like ash. The fire under the hood flickered, growing brighter. An orange glow illuminated the wet grass. Nathaniel tried the door handle, locked, jammed by the impact. "Alistair!" Nathaniel pounded on the glass. "Wake up!" Inside the car, Alistair Sterling floated in a dark, warm void. He heard a voice calling him from a great distance. It sounded like his father. No, it sounded like his shareholders. He opened his eyes. The world was spinning. There was a man outside the window, a giant, a demon. Alistair fumbled for the door handle, his fingers numb. "Go away," he slurred, coughing as smoke began to fill the cabin. "Let me finish it." "You don't get to die here, Sterling," Nathaniel roared. He looked around, seeing a heavy piece of the iron gate lying in the grass nearby. He grabbed it, wielding it like a battering ram. Smash! The safety glass shattered into thousands of diamonds. Nathaniel reached in, unlocking the door, and wrenched it open with a groan of exertion, metal screeching against metal. The heat from the engine was intense now. Flames were licking up the dashboard. "Get out," Nathaniel ordered, unbuckling Alistair's seatbelt. "No," Alistair wheezed. He looked at Nathaniel with eyes that were glassy and filled with a terrifying emptiness. "I have nowhere to go. You took it. You took the house. The company. The boys. You threw them away." Nathaniel grabbed Alistair by the lapels of his ruined suit. "You treated them like assets to be liquidated. Now move, damn you!" Nathaniel hauled him out. Alistair was dead weight, his legs dragging. Nathaniel pulled him across the wet lawn, putting 10 yards, then 20, between them and the ticking time bomb of the car. They collapsed onto the wet grass, just as the gas tank ignited. Boom! The explosion turned the night into day. A fireball rolled into the sky, singeing the leaves of the oak tree. The concussion wave washed over them, hot and forceful. Nathaniel lay on his back, breathing hard, the rain cooling his burning face. Alistair lay beside him, curled in a fetal position, watching his car, his last symbol of power, burn to a skeleton. Alistair started to laugh. It was a wet, gurgling sound. "You should have let me burn. It would have looked better for the quarterly report." Nathaniel sat up, wiping mud from his eyes. He looked down at the man who had been his rival, his enemy, and now his burden. You think death is the punishment? Nathaniel said, his voice cutting through the roar of the fire. No, Alistair. Death is too easy. You're going to live. You're going to live to see every birthday you miss. You're going to live to see the stock hit record highs without your name on the letterhead. You're going to sit in a cell and watch the world forget you. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder. Blue and red lights began to strobe against the trees. Alistair looked up at the house. Through the rain, he saw the front door open. Serafina stood there, silhouetted by the warm, golden light of the foyer. She wasn't running to him. She wasn't crying for him. She was simply standing there, watching. And behind her, peeking around her legs, were two small boys. Alistair reached a hand out, trembling. Leo. Orion. Serafina placed a hand on each of the boys' shoulders and gently guided them back inside, closing the heavy door. The lock clicked. It was the loudest sound Alistair had ever heard. He let his hand drop into the mud. 3 days later, the room at New York Presbyterian was sterile, white, and silent. The hum of the vitals monitor was the only conversation partner Alistair had. He had a broken collarbone, 3 fractured ribs, and a concussion. Physically, he would heal in 6 weeks, but as he stared at the ceiling, he knew the rest of him was terminal. The door opened. Alistair's heart jumped. For a split second, he hoped it was Serafina. Maybe she had come to yell at him. Even hate would be better than indifference. It wasn't Serafina. It was a man in a cheap suit, holding a clipboard. A public defender. Mr. Sterling, the man said, looking tired. My name is Gary Klein. I've been assigned to your case. Alistair blinked, confused. Where is Thorne? Marcus Thorne. He's my attorney. Klein sighed, pulling a chair up to the bed. Mr. Thorne filed a motion to withdraw as counsel yesterday. He cited non-payment of retainers and a conflict of interest regarding the upcoming SEC hearings. He's gone, Alistair. Alistair felt a cold sweat break out. I can pay him. I have. You have nothing, Klein said gently, as if explaining death to a child. Your assets were frozen this morning by the federal government pending the investigation. Your accounts are locked. The penthouse is being seized. You are indigent, Mr. Sterling. Indigent. The word hung in the air like a foul smell. And my family? Alistair asked, his voice a whisper. Did anyone call? Klein flipped through his notes. We contacted your ex-wife, Ms. Blackwood, to inform her of your condition. And? She thanked the officer for the update and said that since you are no longer legally related to her or the children, she has no authority to make medical decisions. She forwarded your file to the state. She hadn't even come to gloat. To her, he was just administrative paperwork. Alistair turned his head toward the window. He could see the skyline of Manhattan in the distance. Somewhere in that city, people were making deals. Waiters were pouring champagne. Bianca was probably at a party, spinning her story of victimhood. He was alone. Truly, utterly alone. The realization hit him harder than the oak tree had. He pulled the thin hospital blanket up to his chin and stared at the white wall, waiting for the police to come and take him to the cage he had built for himself. 6 months later, the trial of United States versus Alistair Sterling was the media event of the season, but not in the way Alistair had hoped. He wasn't the dashing villain. He was the cautionary tale. He sat at the defense table in an ill-fitting suit provided by the state. His hair had grayed rapidly. He looked small. When the judge read the verdict, Alistair didn't flinch. Guilty on all counts. The sentence was severe. The judge, a stern woman who had zero patience for white-collar arrogance, looked over her spectacles at him. Mr. Sterling, You treated the financial markets like a casino, and your family like collateral. You have shown no remorse, only regret that you were caught. I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 10. As the gavel banged, Alistair turned to look at the gallery. It was packed with reporters, sketch artists, and former employees who had lost their pensions because of his schemes. But in the back row, there was one face he recognized: Nathaniel Blackwood. Nathaniel wasn't smiling. He wasn't cheering. He sat with his arms crossed, watching with a stoic intensity. Their eyes met. Alistair wanted to mouth something defiant. "I'll be back. You didn't win." But as he looked into Nathaniel's eyes, he saw the truth. Nathaniel wasn't there to gloat. He was there to ensure the threat was neutralized. He was there as a protector, making sure the predator was locked away. Nathaniel gave a single, slow nod, a final acknowledgement of the end of the war, and then stood up. He turned his back and walked out of the courtroom, pushing through the heavy double doors into the sunlight. Alistair watched the doors swing shut. The bailiff grabbed his arm. "Let's go, Sterling." 5 years later, the sun over the Val d'Orzia was a heavy, golden honey, draping the rolling hills in warmth. The air smelled of rosemary, baking bread, and cypress. At the Blackwood Summer Estate, a restored farmhouse that dated back to the 17th century, a long wooden table was set under a pergola covered in wisteria. Serafina walked out of the kitchen, carrying a large platter of roasted lamb and artichokes. She was 40 years old now, and she had never looked more radiant. The stress lines that had once marred her forehead during the Sterling years were gone, replaced by laugh lines that crinkled when she smiled. She wore a simple linen dress, her feet bare against the warm stone of the patio. "Lunch is ready," she called out, her voice carrying over the breeze. "Coming, Mama." 2 boys, now 9 years old, came sprinting from the olive grove. Leo and Orion were tall for their age, with sun-bleached hair and skinned knees. They were breathless, laughing, shoving each other playfully as they raced to the table. Trailing behind them was Nathaniel. He was carrying a toddler on his shoulders, a little girl with wild, dark curls and Serafina's eyes. This was Eleanor, the surprise blessing they hadn't thought possible. Nathaniel swung Elena down, kissing her cheek before placing her in her high chair. He looked at the boys. "Wash your hands. I saw you digging for beetles. I don't want dirt on the bread." "But Papa, we found a huge one," Orion exclaimed, splashing his hands in the outdoor basin. "A stag beetle. It had massive pinchers." "Did you keep it?" Nathaniel asked, pouring wine for Serafina. "No," Leo said, drying his hands. "Orion wanted to, but I said we should let it go. It has a family too, probably." Nathaniel froze for a second, the bottle hovering over the glass. He looked at his son, the son who shared Alistair's DNA, but Nathaniel's heart. "That was kind of you, Leo," Nathaniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "Mercy is the mark of a strong man." Serafina reached across the table and squeezed Nathaniel's hand. She knew what he was thinking. They rarely spoke of Alistair. He was a ghost, a shadow that had once darkened their door, but had been banished by the light they had built together. They ate, the conversation flowing easily from soccer practice to the harvest to Elena's first words. It was mundane, it was simple, and it was everything Serafina had ever wanted. As the sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the vineyard, Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, watching the boys chase the family dog, a golden retriever named Buster, through the tall grass. "Do you ever wonder?" Serafina asked softly, tracing the rim of her glass. "About what? If things had been different, if he hadn't done what he did." Nathaniel looked at her. "If he hadn't been a fool, I would never have met you. I would still be a workaholic living in a silent penthouse, and those boys wouldn't know what it means to be truly safe." He stood up and walked behind her chair, wrapping his arms around her shoulders and resting his chin on her head. "I don't thank him for the pain he caused you," Nathaniel whispered. "But I thank the universe that he was blind enough to let you go, because picking up the pieces of his mistake was the greatest honor of my life." Serafina leaned back into him, closing her eyes. "He wanted to be a king," she murmured. "He was a king," Nathaniel said, looking out at his children running free under the Tuscan sky. "But he forgot that a king without a queen and a kingdom of love is just a man in a chair." Far away, in a correctional facility in upstate New York, inmate 784-22 sat on the edge of his bunk. It was recreation hour, but he didn't go outside. It was raining. Alistair Sterling held a crumpled photograph in his hand. It was the only one he had, a paparazzi shot torn from a newspaper years ago. It showed Serafina getting into a car, heavily pregnant. He couldn't see her face clearly, but he stared at it anyway. The guard walked by. "Lights out in 10, Sterling." Alistair nodded. He placed the photo under his pillow. He lay down and stared at the concrete ceiling. He tried to remember the sound of Leo's laugh, or the color of Orion's eyes. But all he could hear was the rain, and all he could see was grey. He closed his eyes and waited for sleep, the only place where he still owned anything at all. The fall of Alistair Sterling wasn't written in the stars. It was written in the fine print of his own arrogance. He believed that value was determined by net worth, and that loyalty was a depreciating asset. He was wrong. Serafina proved that a woman's worth isn't in who she stands behind, but in who she stands with. Nathaniel Blackwood showed that being a father isn't about biology. It's about showing up when the storm hits. In the end, Alistair lost, not because he was outsmarted, but because he was outclassed. He chased the glitter of a model and lost the gold of a family, learning the hardest lesson of all. You can buy a house, but you have to build a home. Wow, what a roller coaster. From the boardroom to the jail cell, Alistair definitely got what he deserved. But what do you think? Did Nathaniel let him off too easy by saving him from the car crash, or was living with the guilt the ultimate punishment? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice and romance, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next part of our Billionaire drama series. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.